Throughout the 10th and the 11th of July, the II SS-Panzer Corps continued its attack toward Prokhorovka, reaching within 3 kilometers of the settlement by the night of July 11th. That same night, Hauser issued orders for the attack to continue the next day. The plan was for the 3rd SS Panzer Division Totenkopf to drive northeast until it reached the Kutuzov-Prokhorovka road. Once there, they were to strike southeast to attack the Soviet positions at Prokhorovka from the flanks and rear. The 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandard and 2nd SS Panzer Division Das Reich were to wait until Totenkopf attack had destabilized the Soviet positions at Prokhorovka. And once underway, the 1st SS Leibstandard was to attack the main Soviet defenses dug in on the slopes southwest of Prokhorovka. To the division's right, the 2nd SS Das Reich was to advance eastward. Then turn southward away from Prokhorovka to roll up the Soviet lines opposing the 3rd Panzer Corps' advance and force a gap. During the night of July 11th, Rotmistrov moved his 5th Guards Tank Army to an assembly area just behind Prokhorovka in preparation for a massive attack the following day. At 5:45, Leibstandard headquarters started receiving reports of the sound of tank engines as the Soviets moved into their assembly areas. Soviet artillery and Katyusha regiments were redeployed in preparation for the counterattack. At around 8 o'clock, a Soviet artillery barrage began. At 8:30, Rotmistrov radioed his tankers. Steel, 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 the order to commence the attack. Down off the west slopes, before Prokhorovka. Came the massed armor of 5 tank brigades from the Soviet 18th and 29th Tank Corps of the 5th Guards Tank Army. The Soviet tanks advanced down the corridor. Carrying mounted infantrymen of the 9th Guards Airborne Division on the tanks. To the north and east, the 3rd SS Panzer Division Totenkopf was engaged by the Soviet 33rd Guards Rifle Corps. Tasked with flanking the Soviet defenses around Prokhorovka, the unit first had to beat off a number of attacks before they could go over onto the offensive. Most of the division's tank losses occurred late in the afternoon as they advanced through minefields against well-hidden Soviet anti-tank guns. Although Totenkopf succeeded in reaching the Kartashuka-Prokhorovka road, their hold was tenuous and it cost the division half of its armor. The majority of German tank losses suffered at Prokhorovka occurred here. To the south, the Soviet 18th and 29th Tank Corps had been thrown back by Leibstandard Division. Das Reich also repelled attacks from the 2nd Tank Corps and the 2nd Guards Tank Corps. Luftwaffe local air superiority over the battlefield also contributed to the Soviet losses. By the end of the day, the Soviets had fallen back to their starting positions. Neither the 5th Guards Tank Army nor the II SS-Panzer Corps accomplished their objectives. Although the Soviet counterattack failed with heavy losses, throwing them back onto the defensive, they did enough to stop a German breakthrough. On the evening of July 12, Hitler summoned Kluge and Manstein to his headquarters at Gorlitz in East Prussia. The Western Allies had invaded Sicily. The threat of further Allied landings in Italy or along southern France made Hitler believe it was essential to stop the offensive and move forces from Kursk to Italy. Hitler ordered Manstein's reserve, the 24th Panzer Corps, to move south. After 3 days, on July 17th, the 2nd SS-Panzer Corps was ordered to end its offensive operations and begin to withdraw. Manstein was highly critical of Hitler's decision to call off the operation at the height of the tactical battle. The thinly stretched German 9th Army stood in the way of the Soviet Bryansk front. During the defensive preparations in the months leading up to Citadel, the Soviets also planned and prepared counteroffensive operations that would be launched after the German offensive had halted. The German commanders had been wary of such an attack and forces were quickly withdrawn from the Kursk offensive to meet the Soviet offensive. Operation Kutuzov reduced the Oral salient and inflicted substantial losses on the German military, paving the way for the liberation of Smolensk. Soviet losses were heavy, but were replaced. The offensive allowed the Soviets to seize the strategic initiative, which they retained for the remainder of the war. After the heavy losses sustained by the Voronezh Front during Citadel, the Soviets needed time to regroup and refit. Delaying the start of the offensive Operation Rumiantsev until August 3rd. Diversionary attacks, launched 2 weeks earlier across the Donets and Meuse rivers into the Donbass, drew the attention of German reserves and thinned the defending forces that would face the main blow. The offensive was initiated by the Voronezh Front and steppe fronts against the northern wing of Army Group South. They drove through the German positions, making broad and deep penetrations. By August 5th, the Soviets had liberated Belgorod. By August 12th, the outskirts of Kharkov had been reached. The Soviet advance was finally halted by a counterattack by the 2nd SS Das Reich and 3rd SS Totenkopf divisions. In the ensuing tank battles, the Soviet armies suffered heavy losses in armor. After this setback, the Soviets focused on Kharkov. After heavy fighting, the city was liberated on August 23rd. This battle is referred to by the Germans as the Fourth Battle of Kharkov, while the Soviets refer to it as the Belgorod-Kharkov Offensive Operation. The campaign was a strategic Soviet success. For the first time, a major German offensive had been stopped before achieving a breakthrough. The Germans, despite using more technologically advanced armor than in previous years, were unable to break through the deep Soviet defenses and were caught off guard by the significant operational reserves of the Red Army. According to German medical records from the Battle of Kursk, German forces suffered up to 203,000 casualties and 2,952 tanks and armored vehicles destroyed or damaged. Half of these were recovered and repaired. The Soviets lost 863,303 men, 7,000 tanks and armored vehicles, 3,300 aircraft, and 5,244 artillery pieces. The Soviet victory was costly, with the Red Army losing considerably more men and material than the German army. The Soviet Union was able to compensate for these losses with its abundant human resources and industrial production capacity thanks to the massive material support from the Western Allies. Germany never recovered. Further, the Western Allied landings in Italy opened a new front, further diverting German resources and attention. The initiative firmly passed to the Red Army. For the remainder of the war, the Germans were limited to reacting to Soviet advances. And were never able to regain the initiative or launch a major offensive on the Eastern Front. The Battle of Kursk is cited by some as being the true turning point of the European theater of World War II, although this view has frequently been criticized.